test is simple. All you have to do is destroy all MTs that have entered this region. Should you succeed, you will be registered as a Raven in the arena. If you fail, you die.
Hello everyone. You join me back again as we continue Armored Core August with our 4th entry into the series, that being Armored Core 2 for the PlayStation 2. This new entry brings along with it a host of new and expanded mechanics, which we'll discuss in just a little bit, but first I want to thank HaloOwl for his lovely artwork. Be sure to check him out down below, and be sure to support the content if you're enjoying it. Now let's dive in and begin with the story and development, shall we? After the Earth has started to rebuild and expand after the Great Destruction, Mars colonization has been seen as a new outlet for humanity to survive and thrive, and as such, you are one of the Ravens who has left Earth to seek your fortunes and make a name for yourself in this brave new frontier, along with fighting off an ancient mecha race known as the Disorders, who are potentially being controlled by one of the key players in the story. But will you survive the wars between the corporations as well as EarthGov with the help of Nell? That's up to you to find out. Armored Core 2 takes place on Mars as it's being terraformed and colonized by various corporations who have left Earth and traveled to Mars, seeking to establish themselves as the newly dominant powers in what is essentially the latest Wild West. Released in 2000 as a PlayStation 2 launch title, this game establishes the series in a shiny new package on the next generation of hardware, and it sets out to really take advantage of the new hardware, allowing it to be shinier and prettier than ever, as well as adding some minor changes, such as the fact that left arm mounted equipment now actually shows up on the left arm, rather than coming out of said arm like it did in the PlayStation 1 games. There isn't actually a whole lot of information on the development history of this game that I could find, unlike the first three, so let's jump into the meat and cover the gameplay. Armored Core 2, fittingly for being the next generation entry in the series, brings with it a whole host of new and expanded mechanics and slows down the core gameplay of the PS1 games just a little bit, making your mechs feel a bit more stompy, though still quite capable of zooming around the arenas and battlefields, especially with the newly introduced overboost mechanic, which allows you to, at the cost of rapid energy drain, to basically blast off like a rocket in any direction. This really does allow you to take enemies by surprise, perform complex flanks, and reach parts of the environment in record time. Though you'll definitely have to keep a close eye on your energy gauge, because it will eat it fast. And it definitely takes some time to get used to the movement tech before you're able to optimally use it. Another new addition to the game is a heat gauge, which as you or your opponent's mechs take damage, it will cause the heat gauge to rise, forcing you to seek cover and dodge out of the oncoming path, or else you risk the gauge peaking and causing your mech to enter into an error state where your mech rapidly drains health as well as outputs energy slower, making you even more likely to take punishment if you manage to bottom out the energy gauge. But this also applies to enemy mechs. If you manage to sustain heavy fire upon an enemy, or even more punishingly, you can use a variety of the new weapons introduced that specifically cause a large increase of heat damage, such as the new flamethrower, which you can then manage to engage and sustain fire in close quarters. You will cause the enemy to burn up and suffer the negative effects themselves, which some builds this can completely neuter their capabilities, such as energy weapon reliant builds, as the energy drain effect is crippling to builds that focus on regenerating power as quickly as possible, especially if you can force them into a charge state, completely halting them for 15 to 30 seconds and forcing them to awkwardly try to walk away. To go alongside this new mechanic, there's been a few new categories of parts added to the game, starting with the new radiator section, which offer a variety of parts that control how fast your mech can vent off the excess heat, both in normal situations as well as having enhanced forced cooling modes, where if you enter a heat state, it'll try to vent the heat off as quickly as possible. Another new part category is actually extensions, which are external parts to the mech, which can be activated by default by pressing L3, which will trigger different mechanics. Some will cause it to shoot down missiles automatically, or others will let you boost quickly in one direction or the other. Some will fire support missiles in conjunction with your regular attacks, or will fire missiles that also collide with enemy missiles to bring them down before they can hit you, adding even more versatility and functionality to your mechs and hitting your foes with a surprise. The final new category of parts is called inside parts. These parts also add a variety of new supportive tools, such as decoys that'll draw the fire of enemy missiles, drawing in their homing function, or a radar decoy that adds a fake blip to confuse and distract enemies, and more likely to be effective on opposing players. Hell, they've even added a few new left arm type weapons, in the form of the series' first energy shield, letting you deflect and reduce incoming damage while it's active. The gameplay is also definitely innovating and expanding upon the original series and bringing in all sorts of new equipment. There's even new leg types, that being the series' first hover legs, which allow you to passively hover around the environment, and levels in which there's water hazards where you could fall into the ocean and die. Well, not anymore, just hover right along the surface of the water, no problem, which could really save you a lot of headaches, such as on the Escort the Submarine mission, where if you fall in the drink, you're done. Speaking of, the game keeps on the tradition established by Project Phantasma, where it keeps bringing new and interesting sorts of missions instead of only seek and destroy. A lot of the missions definitely take a difficulty spike compared to Master Arena as well, with more instant fail game over missions such as the Attack Research Team mission. So be sure to save often and consider saving in multiple slots. So if you find yourself having a lot of trouble with one mission, you could try another instead. Control-wise, it's exactly the same as the PS1 games, but with the L3, R3 buttons being utilized for some of the new features. And actually, a pretty nice feature I'd like to mention is now you can remap the controls however you like on the controller, which, while not as good as letting me use the analog sticks, it's still a pretty nice quality of life addition. The arena also makes a return for Master Arena, though it's not quite as large and extensive as it was in Master Arena, featuring only 49 opponents, until you beat the story in which 8 more optional opponents will be unlocked. These opponents being foes that you could kill in the story mode, such as Holy Mother, which will cause them to be replaced in the arena instead. Once the game is beaten, you could fight all the additional foes as well. There's also less weapons and parts to unlock via the arena compared to Master Arena, but there's more parts and weapons to unlock through the story campaign, either via assisting specific corporations or via finding them throughout the world. Emblem and mecha customizations also still present, with some quality of life improvements on the UI, making it easier to utilize the various features of the menu and not forcing you into a secondary menu for, say, undoing a mistake or wiping the slate clean to start fresh. And yes, I added more degeneracy to go alongside of Luna for my Armored Core 1 playthroughs. I also forgot to mention they further improved and refined the custom color layouts of the mechs, allowing you to choose custom colors for 5 different bits of each part, that being a base color, an aid color which accents it, detail colors, joint colors, and finally optional colors. And while there is less patterns than there is in the original games, the additional fine-tuning of your own custom colors is a nice option to have. Oh, and the final quality of life improvement, you can now have up to 3 pre-built mech loadouts that you could swap through at any time, which makes it easier to have different loadouts for various arena opponents, or for missions where, say, you need to move faster, or maybe the big heavy approach is the way to go, or maybe you want hover legs for a water level, but you don't want to completely change the mech every time. There's also more missions than there is in Project Phantasma and Master Arena, bringing the total up to 36, bringing it closer to Armored Core 1 size with 45 missions, and potentially longer if you plan to spend a good portion of time in the arena, which I recommend for the additional resources that the arena mode will grant you. There's a lot of different circumstances where it's definitely a nice addition. The final change to Armored Core 2 is the fact that you can now fully customize your HUD, allowing you to fine-tune the information on display, as well as changing through a variety of different colors, so your game will appear even more how you like it, which is a really nice addition. And honestly, a lot of the improvements and interesting gameplay additions over the PlayStation 1 generation, but the PlayStation 1 generation is also pretty damn enjoyable for its faster pace of gameplay and more stable performance, which will be mentioned in the next portion. Kicking off the launch of a new generation of Armored Core games, 2 really does step the graphics up a considerable bit over Armored Core 1, Project Phantasma, and Master Arena, both in the CGI department looking even shinier and clearer than ever, and the day-to-day gameplay sections. The mechs look cooler, the weather effects are more intense than ever, the explosions are bigger than ever, and with all the wild new weapons and parts, they look wild as fuck. Like I mentioned in the development, the increased graphics even allowed minor changes, such as the fact that arm blades are actually mounted to the arm, allowing you to see what's being used at a glance. The soundtrack is also still as killer as ever, with its fast-paced and bumping soundtrack. Still really fits the mecha styling the games go for. Though I will say I do miss the Armored Core 1 main hub theme for the Raven's Nest. That track is burned into my brain permanently, and it won't evacuate my head. But then again, I did play like 30-ish hours between the 3 games. Now, performance-wise, this is where the game definitely takes a hit. The graphics are nicer than ever, but because of the higher visual quality, the engine cannot take as much action before it starts to slow down, fire off too many explosions, or very large explosions in rapid succession, or fill the environment with way too many enemies, and the frame rate starts to chug until you can start clearing it out and bringing it down. Though sometimes you can use this to your advantage to get your bearings on a tricky situation, and potentially use the extra time to adapt on the fly and combat a tricky foe. Now, I'm not saying these performance issues are a good thing, but I am providing a good use for a bad situation. But as long as you're not in a situation with a massive amount of explosions or many enemies packed into a tight area, then the game runs pretty smoothly and damn nice looking for a launch title. Armored Core 2 is probably the most accessible title in the series. With it being a PlayStation launch title, there's a lot of copies running around out there, easily found in local stores and online. And with a lot of the quality of life additions made in this entry, make it real easy to recommend this entry in the series. Couple its relative ease of access and nice improvements on the gameplay, it's actually an easy game to recommend as a beginning point for someone not interested in playing the PlayStation 1 entries of the series. While the performance issues can be annoying, they aren't the worst I've seen. I've had no crashes or other issues outside of one of my consoles dying on me, but that wasn't the fault of Armored Core 2. That was the fault of the capacitors burning out. And luckily I have backup consoles, so I only had to redo the first mission and recreate my new emblem. So yeah, I'd recommend you go out and buy yourself a copy of Armored Core 2 if you're looking for a good quality mecha experience with high customization. Now before I go, I'd like to once again thank Halo for the variety of lovely thumbnails he has made for Armored Core. I'd also like to once again thank each and every one of the members and donors seen on screen, for your support helps keeping me making content. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to support the content with a like and comment your thoughts and experiences on the series and videos. This has been Core, and I'll see you next time when we get into Armored Core 2, Another Age, the only expansion Armored Core 2 had.